Right. So what we discussed in the previous session about the MySQL in reference to the commands, right? So different commands is what something which we have discussed in the previous session, right? So and today I had there is a small concept which let me complete today. So tomorrow onwards, how to create queries and all of it. There are a few important queries. Being a data analysis, we must be knowing because in the last session also I told you. So there are some important queries which you guys have to understand. So how to understand those queries and all everything that we are going to discuss in tomorrow onwards, right? So different queries and all, right? How to write query. So if you want to write query and all, there is a database which we have to be taken. At the same time, we need to write down the query statement, whatever the statement for queries we have. That query statements has to be written. Subsequently, how to create queries to get the final output and all, right? So that is all something will be discussed in coming days. So in the previous session, if you have remembered, because there is one point with one topic which was missed, so which I'm covering today. Next, I go back to the SQL queries part. Okay, I'll go to that. Now, in context to the schemas, because in the last session, if you remember, I have discussed about the kind of tables, whatever the added tables we have, right? Added views, right? All these things were discussed in the earlier session. At the same time, whenever we are working on scripting part, because this is where generally SQL scripting will be used for. So when we want to create any kind of SQL scripting and all, here there is an option for add scripting wherein you can see. So whatever the script files we have to generate, right? So this is where generally in the last session when I have added, when I explained you about creation of tables and all everything, I have discussed with you. Now, today I'm going to discuss about few points, which is about the user perspective, because user is something, one of the key and prominent element to be understood with. Because user can be anyone, because this is where being a data analyst, you must be knowing some concept here in context to the user part. So the context is very simple. In context to the user itself is concerned, users can be people who are managing the application. Okay. So whenever we are trying to understand about the users in context to the managing of application is concerned, so there are few elements we need to consider. What kind of users are we? Because being into data analysis, so we are one of the users who will be there to analyze the data, but we are not someone like an administrator kind of roles. So when there is any SQL, when we're working on any MySQL workbench, whenever we want to create any queries, etc., all that. So there are options where we have to be mentioned about the username, passwords, right? So all these things has to be updated subsequently. So this is where generally these users and all everything are something comes under here, right? So you can see there is an option called user, right? So in the right hand side, you can see all these here, right? So here. So here, if you want to edit the template, you can edit. Otherwise, if you want to have a new table for template and all, from the template and all everything, we can create, right? So whatever the new templates do we have, right? So new table templates and all everything can be created subsequently. This is point number one. Second, about the category part, because different category of the data, what is that we are going to mention under the SQL part. So whatever the categories are we going to mention and how are these categories are important depends on the kind of project as well as the kind of data, what is that we are going to take. Whatever the templates do we have and all everything will be varied. It will not be the same for all the times. The kind of templates and all everything will be varied because users can be different. At the same time, categories can be different even. At the same time, timestamps, right? So all these things are something different when we are working on SQL on that, right? So timestamps is one of its kind, which we can use it. At the same time, user information can be updated over here. Subsequently, apart from the user, the next was about the category. Whatever the category ID number do we have? So whatever the kind of name to be updated in regard to this, right? So all this information has to be updated when we are working on it. Now, if we want to create any kind of template, right? So if you want to create any kind of template, what is that we wants to use? Here you can see this is where generally option you can see. Open the table template of editor, right? So this you can just click on this, right? See here there are different user types and all that. It's for example when we want to create the timestamps and all everything. This is what generally the data will be mentioned in it, right? So we can create the time, we can update the time, right? So we can click and add it, right? So if you want to add any kind of information, everything can be added here. This is where generally timestamps and all everything are something used here. Next was user. User nothing but users. Whoever the users and all everything is what something which we have to be seen with. Okay. So because user is what something we have taken. Username is what something we have taken. So when we talk about the username, this is where we have to understand about database tables. Because in the previous session, even I told you, table creation is one of the key and prominent element when we are working on the data. So if you want to analyze any kind of data, first of all, you have to store the data, which is important. You know that. So if you want to store the data, there must be a table of creating columns and all everything is what something which we have to be created. Unless until if you are not creating any kind of tables, so using this won't be something easy, right? So using something won't be of any use here. So the reason when we are working on SQL, especially in context to this is concerned, we have to mention about the kind of usernames. What are the usernames do we have and all everything is what something which we have to be updated. That is one of the key and prominent and important element we have to be focused more on. Username is what something we have to be mentioned. So what are the usernames do we have, all that stuff. So when we are going to create a username, all that, right? So if you want to update all these usernames, etc., here you can see there is an option called table default. So we have to select all the table defects, all that, right? This is where generally we have to select the table defects, all the table defaults, right? So all these things we have to create here, right? So this is where generally this table defaults, right? So all these things we have to create. At the same time, not only the username details, etc. So if you want to add any kind of additional flags, like if you want to add any kind of binaries or unique codes, or if you want any kind of ASCII codes, because there are different ASCII codes which normally we will be using it. So binary codes or unique codes, ASCII codes. So this information can also be updated. Let's say, for example, there is a Unicode information we want to update in the username. Okay, or else it can be a binary code or it can be an ASCII code because different code numbers can be used. So that's where generally we have to be updated because this is all something which we have to do to analyze the data. Because I already told you earlier also, analysis, if you want to analyze the data, there must be a concrete and prominent perfect information has to be updated in the database. So when if you want to update all that and all, we have to create a complete data table in such a way, whatever the required columns and all, everything has to be placed properly. So if you haven't done that, usually we don't have any idea over all that stuff, right? So this is where generally username and all everything will come into picture. So whatever the binary codes, whatever the unique codes, ASCII codes, all these informations is what something which we have to be updated. This is where generally these usernames and all everything were coming into existence. So once the username, the next one we call it as email, right? So because if you want to add some any data, right? So because a customer data we want to add. So if you want to create any kind of customer data or if you want to create any kind of usernames, let's say because users can be anyone, right? So for example, you have taken some, for example, point of sale system, right? So the same example, let me continue. Who are users? Users can be anyone, right? So user can be an administrator. So who is an administrator? Administrator is the person who will see the reports. What are the reports? Sales reports, like sales reports and all everything will be seen by the user, right? So this is one kind. Second, who are other users? It's if it is not what we can say, what we say like if it's not administrator, who are other users? The user can be what we call the user can be inventory person, right? Inventory professional who wants to update the inventory records, etc. Or else it can be a biller who is going to do the billing part, etc. All that, right? So those people are called as billers. So this is how generally whenever we want to update the information, whenever we want to create the information, etc. All that. So this is all important, something which we have to be updated in this. This is where generally email option came into existence, right? So email column will be there, where in this email column, we have to update all the additional flags, whatever is required, whatever is needed and all everything is what something which we have to be updated apart from the username and all. Email details, everything has to be updated equally. So not only email details, the next is about password, right? Whatever the required password we wants to do, whatever the passwords to we wants to create in context to the email part itself is concerned. So all the password details has to be updated equally as far as the user is concerned I'm talking about. So there are existing templates we are using, the kind of table structure we are going to maintain. Whatever are the predefined columns do we have and all everything is what something which can be added to the existing ones. This is where generally these users and all everything were coming into existence. At the same time, if you want to create any kind of time, right? So current time, this is where generally these time stamps and all everything comes into existence, right? So if you want to have any kind of time stamps, right, etc., all that. So this create time also is one of the key and important and prominent element which we have to be focused more on. So how to create the time, right? So that's we have been okay, right? So this is where generally this creation of time and all everything is what something which will be added to the existing ones. This is where generally this username, email, password, create time, all this information will be updated here. Next, after that, the next was about the category part. Okay, so category. So when you talk about the category part itself is concerned, categories are something different because if you want to mention any kind of category ID number, or if you want to update any kind of names or something of that sort, all the category details has to be updated subsequently. So this is where generally this table templates and all everything are something which come into existence when we are working on the data analysis part. So this is where generally data analysis come into existence, right? So if you want to create any kind of data analysis for a particular data, whatever we have taken, it's always important for us to know, it is always important for us to understand about whatever the kind of data do we require to update in the existing repository and how this is to be maintained and created is what something which we have to be understood with. This is where generally this table templates and all everything were coming to picture. So this is how generally this table templates, right? So all these things, information which we have to be updated in the existing application when we are working on. So this is one concept which we have to be known with, okay? Because there are existing table templates which are available. So which normally available, which normally available. So wherein we have to update, that's only the thing which we can do, okay? So we don't require to do anything else apart. So what is that we have to do is to update all the details, all that. So this is what generally we do in context to the table templates, all that, right? Whatever the required table information to be updated, or if you want to create any kind of new templates to be created, right? So, or if you want to have any kind of duplications, or if you want to delete any kind of data from the existing repository, all these things will be updated under the table templates part. This is where generally all these table templates and all everything were coming to existence. So this is one aspect we have to be known with, because when we are creating some data tables, whenever in the last sessions also I told you, right? So when we are going to create any kind of data tables, make sure we have to do some necessary changes in the templates, whatever the related templates are required. Or else if you want to create a new template, here you can see there is an option called new template, because whatever I have explained you so far are the templates which are available already. And but when we want to create a new template, here you can see there is an option called new template. Template 4. Okay, this is what generally the template 4 is what something which we have done. So here, if you want to click add and all everything, this adding details is what something which we have to be updated, right? So this is where generally if you want to add any kind of details, right? So because table 4 was added, for example, right? So table 4, I'm just mentioning it as uh, user information. Okay, right? So user information is what something which I'm taking. Okay, this is where, right? So user information is what something which I have added here. Okay, you can see here. This is where generally, because existing templates will also be they available because those are predefined. Normally that we use it. Okay, we don't require to add anything etc. as separate, right? So whatever the existing ones do we have, the same thing can be used. So that is one thing which normally we do. So if not, if it is not the case, generally what we have to do, user information in context to the details, whatever was there and all everything, that adding details is what something which we have to be updated. Because if you want to click to add to the information and all, whatever the information was created so far. So whatever the related information you want to update here, either it can be code details or it can be unique IDs or something like, right? So if you want to add any kind of data here, there is an option called click add. So wherein this click add information can also be updated in this. So this is also one of the key and important element we have to be focused more when we are working on the table templates, etc. So table templates are something essentially required when we want to extract the data, because if you want to extract the data, there is a right essence of information must be updated in the systems 100%, right? So unless until if we have not updated the right information in the systems, so extracting this information is not something of much use. Okay, so this is where generally this clicking the adding information, updating the information, all these things is what something which we have to be mentioned. This is all something which we have to be mentioned over here. Okay, this is where generally one concept, right? So table template concept is this, right? So this is one thing you can see user information will be there. So what are the category details, right? So table templates, readable tabs, users, right? So all this information can be updated. This is one thing which we have to be known with. Next, if there is any kind of configuration part, because this is also one of the key element for data analysis part we have to be known with. So it's not only about the kind of queries, what is that we are writing and how we are going to extract the data, but it's also configuration is also one of the key and prominent element we have to be focused more on, because configuration is what something which we have to be focused when we are working on the application, especially on data related stuff. Why? Because data information, whatever we are taking and whatever we are storing and extracting, everything is from the database. Okay, from the database we are extracting all the information. So if you want to extract all the information from the database, it's always important for us to create some databases also. So different databases will be created, data tables will be created. So when there are any data tables and data tables and all everything we are creating and all, so database management system, what is the database management system? Always important for us to know about the configuration part also, because what are the required configurations do we have? So those required configurations should also be included in the existing application. That is also one of the key and important element we have to be focused on. So this is where you can see tools configuration, wherein you can see there are two connections we have. One is about the backup connection, second is the restore connection. So backup connections means if you want to, let's say for example, this is where load balancing come into picture. I'll tell you the context. Load balancing means, let's say for example, we are working on application wherein we are maintaining one server. For example, this is something majorly you can see, you can compare and relate. Majorly you can see when we are working on e-commerce or any online sales application and all. Sometimes there is a possibility that there will be a heavy traffic into the database. Database traffic will be very huge. Sometimes I'm saying. So when there is a huge traffic, what will happen? You might have observed there will be, whenever there is a huge amount of traffic is involved, Now, sometimes it will show us as a server busy. Have you noticed that? Server busy, right? So server busy or server down, right? So I think this sort of information you might have seen it. Okay, so server busy, server down, right? This sort of information you might have seen it. This is where generally these backup connections, restore connections, everything will be used of, because there are multiple databases, multiple servers we maintain. So whenever we are maintaining the multiple servers, what's an advantage here? The major advantage in context to the servers is that, for example, if there is any load on the particular server, automatically remaining traffic, whatever is coming as an inflow, so that automatically will be diverted into the next server. So when it is directed to the next server, what will happen? Automatically, the amount of balance of data, what is that we are going to maintain, will be balanced in this. This is where generally these backup connections and all everything are something used for it when we are working on the configurations part, all that. So this backup connections and restore connections, all these things are useful in this context. And this is one of the key and important aspect we have to be seen with, right? So how to maintain the backups, right? So how to restore the connections, right? So this is all something which we have to do in context to the configurations part, all that. So after configuration and in context to the backup connections, here you can see there is an option called backup connection, right? So if you want to take any kind of data, for example, if you want to take any kind of server information, whichever is related, right? So any kind of data if you want to take, right? So if you want to take any employee data set or something like any data has to be maintained and all things. So that part generally is what something which we can do in context to the backup connections, all that, right? So always we can maintain the data, so that backup connections is what something we have to be created. If there is any failure in if there is any failure of data was maintained, for example, right? So any failure of data was maintained, what will happen automatically? There is a possibility of backup will be taken for a particular data, which is something sensitive and important, so that there won't be any problem in terms of the data loss. We don't see any kind of data loss or something of that sort. This is where generally backup connections are coming into picture. So after backup connections, the next is restore connections, right? So here you can see. So what is meant by restoring of connections? Restoring of connections means when there is any information we are updating, right? So whenever we are mentioning about uh, whenever we are mentioning about the data, whenever we are storing all the informations, etc. into. Am I audible? Am I
Yes,
audible
sir.
now?
Yes.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Okay, right. So this is where general restoration of data, backup connections, I think you might have heard about it. Restoration of data. Restoration of connections means, for example, if there is any loss of connection was happened, for example, for some reason, what we have to do, we have to restore the data. Whatever the data are we going to maintain, so the data has to be restored subsequently from here. That's what generally uh, which we have to be focused more on. So this is where generally this restoration of data and all everything are something useful here, right? So this is where it was. So how to restore the data and how to maintain the data is what something which we have to be seen, which we have to understand and observe. So that is something which we have to be focused when we are working on the tool part. So either it can be backup connection or it can be restore connections. This is where generally these connections and all everything are something used for. Next is utilities, whatever the utilities you have, right? So if for example, if there are any kind of object names in the catalogs, for example, right? So here you can see, right? So if you want to clear SQL, right? So or if you want to leave SQL and all, if there is any, because if you want to do that, generally make sure we have to clear whatever the data is maintaining in the SQL while we are using the application. Any data is there and all, everything that can be clean, right? So that is one thing which we can do. Otherwise, leave SQL. Leave SQL means if you want to exit, you have to exit it and you need to do the subsequent details. For that only, then only we are obfuscating the object names, catalogs, and all everything can be updated. But normally, being into data analysis, we don't require. because this obfuscations and all everything is not something which it's not something which we taken into consideration, right? It's not something which we do, because that's not something much of you. I don't say usefulness, but that's not something related and relevant, because for our role it is not relevant and related. So I always advise not to go to the utilities part, but even configurations also, because there are some positions we come across that we will be the administrators and we'll be data analysts, because there will be, because I cannot say that it happens as it is, because some organizations depends on the seniority, depends on the profile, what is that they want. Some organizations, what they want some people whoever wants to have who wants to back up the connections, right? So all these, right? So that's what something which they want to do. So for the backup connections and restoration of connections and all, everything can be done by us, right? So if it is required, again, I'm subject to terms and conditions, as I told you, underline this point. If it is needed, if it is required and all, these backup connections and restoration of connections will be taken into consideration. Otherwise, backup connections and restoring connections is not something which will be taken into account. This is one thing. This is what we call it as configurations are. So after configuration, the next is utilities, as I told you, like obfuscating the object names in catalog. So these are all something which we call it as utilities, etc. All that. Next was catalogs. For example, if you want to maintain any kind of tables, or if you want to maintain any kind of table columns, right? So all these things and all, here you can see there is an option called catalog, wherein whatever the list of catalogs we have, whatever the kind of tables do we have and all everything, right? So whatever the table data which has to be mentioned in it, everything will be mentioned under the catalog part. This is where generally these catalogs and all everything are used. So do remember, these are the different tools will be used. Okay, that is one thing you have to be known with, right? So that's required and that's important, right? So catalog is what something which will be used as a tool. So whatever the required tools information, every information can be updated subsequently. This is where generally these catalogs, tools, and all everything are something comes into existence. So once the catalog, the next is objects, right? So whatever the related objects are, if you want to create any multiple tables sometimes, because large amount of data when we are maintaining, sometimes whenever we are maintaining some data warehousing tools or something like in the real world, I'm saying. So normally this creation of multiple tables is what something we do, right? So if you want to create any multiple tables and all everything, so that we can create. Table creations can be done, but that's not something required, right? So that's not, so that we don't need it. Next, shell, that's not needed for you. So hence I'm not getting into shell, MySQL shell, all that, right? That's not related and relevant also for us. But workbench is something which important. So in context to the data analysis role, in connection to the not only data analyst, in connection to the data admin related stuff, if you are maintaining, as I mentioned earlier, there are some configurations which we have to be maintained, like backup connections, restore connections, all these things has to be updated. At the same time, whatever the required utilities or catalogs to be maintained or objects to be maintained by creating multiple tables, right? So all these things has to be updated in this application. This is what something which we have to be used when we are working on the SQL part. Is it clear, everyone? Is it clear or not? Anirudh, Prajwal,
Yes.
is it clear to everyone?
Yes. Yes.
Right. So these are the two important points we have to be know. One is about this modeling attribute additions. This is one thing which we have to know. That's what something which we have discussed in today's session. At the same time, even discussing about the tools, whatever the configuration related backup connections or restore connections. So these are the two things which we have discussed so far. And tomorrow onwards, we are going to create the queries and all, how to create SQL queries. First of all, you need to know how to write statements, because writing the statements is what something which you have to know first. So based on the statements, what is that we have written, whatever the data we have taken, finally, queries will be extracted from the existing database, what we have maintained and all everything in regular intervals. That's what something which you have to be learned with. That's what something which we are doing from tomorrow onwards. Tomorrow onwards, this will be taken into consideration. Yeah, so tomorrow onwards, it is taking into consideration where we will be discussing about this part, right? So whatever the additions and all everything, that's all something which we are discussing from tomorrow onwards. Is it clear? Is it clear or not?
It is.
Is it clear? Is it clear?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Right. So this is all for session today. Today is a short session. So tomorrow onwards, how to create queries and all everything is what something we are learning. Right. So how to create this commands, right? So scripts. That's all something we are learning from tomorrow onwards. Clear, guys? Understood?
Yes.
Right. So then we'll meet tomorrow and we discuss more further on this. See you then. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.